Welcome to the Motivation Insiders podcast, where we explore best practices for designing, implementing, and measuring incentive, recognition, and loyalty programs. We look at motivation with an exclusive view, well, from the inside. This is an ongoing podcast designed and produced by the IESP, the Incentive Engagement Solutions Providers of the Incentive Marketing Association. This episode, Rethinking Motivation in Sales, Intrinsic versus Extrinsic Drivers, has been sponsored by 110. 110 is a motivation science company specializing in channel and employee engagement across the U.S. and Canada. The company applies behavioral science and data-driven strategy to design programs that influence behavior, improve engagement, and drive measurable business results. Solutions include channel engagement, sales enablement, incentives, recognition and rewards, and experiential travel and events programs.
Welcome to Motivation Insiders. Behavioral science tells us something interesting. People, we, aren't very good at explaining what truly motivates us. So if we don't fully understand our own motivations, how do we design programs that motivate sales professionals to perform at their best? In sales organizations, motivation has traditionally been driven by extrinsic rewards. Things like commissions, bonuses, contests, and leaderboards. And if you're doing those things, great. But if that's all you're doing, you're missing out on the biggest motivational tool. Behavioral science suggests motivation is more complex than only relying on extrinsic rewards and focusing on rewarding outcomes. Intrinsic factors, things like autonomy, mastery, purpose, and recognition, play a powerful role in sustaining engagement and performance over time. So today, we're exploring a simple but important question. What really motivates sales professionals, and how should organizations think about balancing intrinsic and extrinsic motivation when designing performance programs? And to help unpack that question, I'm joined by two fantastic guests who provide a wealth of experience and valuable perspectives on motivation, behavior, and incentive design. First, Tim Houlihan. Tim is the co-founder and co-host of the Behavioral Grooves podcast and is recently the enterprise director for behavioral science at Truist Bank, the sixth largest bank in the U.S. He helps organizations improve productivity, team effectiveness, sales performance, communication, and customer experience, all with the goal of helping people make better decisions and live better lives. Hey, Tim.
Good to see you, Carl. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Next, we have Adeshola Jayola. Shola is the country director and lead of international partnerships at UWin iWin Incentives. With more than 12 years of experience, she helps organizations improve employee engagement, motivation, and retention through results-driven incentive programs. Shola has led high-performing sales teams across industries including telecom, banking, insurance, automotive, and manufacturing, helping companies drive growth by leveraging innovative digital solutions. Her goal is simple, and I love this: helping organizations win. And I'm your host, Carl McDonald with Vibe SMG, current board member of the IESP and a longtime proponent of the Incentive Marketing Association. And this is a first, I think, for Motivation Insiders. We have 3 participants in 3 separate countries. So I'm in Canada, Shola is in Nigeria, and Tim is in the US. So let's dive in. Tim, I'm going to start with you. The intro to this podcast or this episode was really inspired by a conversation that we had about the podcast, where you educated me to the fact that, behavioral science tells us that we're not good at understanding what really motivates us. So I know that this is a big topic, but why is that? What gets in the way of us truly understanding what drives us?
It's a really great question, Carl, and I think it starts with the fact that our feelings are really kind of blunt instruments. So if we use our feelings as the lens that we have to what is motivating us, because motivation is a feeling, right? It gets us up in the morning, it gets us moving. If our feelings are that lens and that connective tissue, then, and we're using kind of a blunt instrument, then we're gonna be wrong sometimes. We get really good at preferences. Like our preferences, choose between this and that, do it on Friday versus do it on Saturday, go for ice cream versus go for pasta. I can make those preferences all day long, but those really aren't my motivations. Motivations are really different. And this really came to light when when I was thinking about like the difference between risk and uncertainty. Like if we think about how we feel about a risky situation or an uncertain situation, both feel about the same way, but they're really different in the real world. So if we're going to be trying to motivate people, it's not just about getting the right feelings, it's about connecting with people on a level that will actually drive their motivation, which is something that they're not going to be able to do a good job of actually expressing themselves. And we've got all kinds of research that if we want to get into it, we can actually talk about that.
And that's fascinating. And that actually leads me to, it's a nice tie into the next topic, which is as sales leaders and you're viewing your sales team and you're trying to think about ways to motivate them beyond what you may know. What are some simple behavioral principles that are tied into what you just said that they should keep in mind when they're starting their thought process on it?
You know, the behavioral science lens starts with observation. It starts with evidence. It's a scientific approach, right? So it's about looking at the world that you're in, looking at your corporate culture, looking at the ways that the things that you've tried in the past, looking at the kind of results that you've gotten, looking at the demographics of the people with a very clear eye, trying to get an understanding of what's happening right now. And then also look at the big broad trends in what are the guidelines that I could use. And ultimately, building a really effective design is going to come from melding these are the best practices, this is what science and evidence informs us is going to work best, and melding that with what you know about your organization and the people and the kind of corporate culture that you have.
That's very interesting. And it reminds me a little bit of the topic whenever you have somebody that is in an executive position and they come to a new organization, it's often recommended to not react to anything within kind of the first month because you should be observing how everything is working. It's similar to that, wouldn't it be?
Yeah, I've seen executives make really terrible mistakes that were completely avoidable. One situation that came to mind was a VP of sales for the Americas who recently got his motorcycle license, and he was super enthusiastic and believed that the top prize for the top winner of a program should be a brand new motorcycle. And to think in the United States, you know, motorcycle licenses are only held by about 15% of the population.
Right.
So it's kind of a niche group to start with, and it turned out that the top salesperson was a woman who was kind of a soccer mom in Dallas, who had actually, sadly, horribly, recently lost her brother in a motorcycle accident, and so you get this just crushing feeling of like, why did you do it that way? There could have been other ways that you could have gone to get a big prize in front of somebody and avoided such a huge mishap.
Well, that's that just eats at you when you hear that. The secondhand cringe of that is just unbelievable. Yeah. So thank you, Tim, for that. Shola, I'm gonna shift. Essentially, what just Tim leaned into there was, acting on instinct. But what I think you operate in the great continent of Africa, and that is for our purposes is still deemed to be an emerging market, right, as it relates to incentive and recognition programs. So outside of being someone that is doing program design, you are working as an educator. You do need to speak with your clients and your prospects about all of those aspects within the program of what's important to consider. When you're first having those conversations, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you're encountering?
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you for having me, Carl, engage in this very interesting industry topic. And it's a pleasure to be here with Tim, who is a super powerhouse with so much vast knowledge about this particular topic. Now, talking about the misconceptions that we usually have firsthand with our clients, it's that of purpose, effect, and value most times. Because, many business leaders just assume that incentives are another form of commission, compensation, or some spiff. Whereas where commissions are part of a salesperson's pay structure, incentives are the behavioral tools that are designed to guide performance, reinforcements, for priorities, and also to recognize the achievements of sales team members. And I like something that Tim actually said. He said motivations are different from preferences. Preferences could make you act on the spur, always engage based on actions that are required of you. And so when these business leaders ask us, they say, why incentives when commissions are already paid? Over time, we eventually make them discover that incentives help shape specific behaviors that commissions alone can't. And when we look at these behaviors, we see them in the areas where we're strengthening distributor loyalty, we're giving the sales team members product knowledge improvements, we're encouraging upselling and cross-selling, which are all tied into a system of performance. And then one thing I always say is the key takeaway for organizations is that commissions rewards outcomes, but incentives influence the behaviors that are tied to engagements. And this distinction gives clarity in the sense that incentives are not added costs, because there's that perception that, it's another budgets, inflated budget or expanded budget requirement from us. No, it's not an added cost, but it's a tool for aligning sales teams' behaviors to the overall organizational commercial objective.
Sure, and that's a great point, and that tangible outcome is what people are used to, right? And you're understanding that based on motivating them towards that ultimate behavior, which is going to be more sales or more calls or whatever that may be, winning more business, that tangible side of things. But when you're approaching those conversations, it must be also difficult to, especially in an industry or I guess a market where it's not common practice yet. How do you sell, or how do you explain the intangible benefits of a program like this, where we would tie in, perhaps that's where that intrinsic component comes in? How do you tie in the intangible benefits that they can see?
I think, look, amongst the three of us here, we will agree that the hardest things to sell are always the intangible things, because you can't just place the immediate look of value on them. But for the tangible benefits, the easiest ones that organizations get to recognize once we get an effective incentive program running for them, they are evident in the increased sales performance. They will definitely see a higher productivity. They will see stronger distributor partnership engagements, and most importantly, improved product focus, because it's always tied to products, for organizations. But along with that are also the intangibles. And these are the benefits which are longer lasting. These are recognized in areas where the team members have a boost in their morale, where we actually see them exhibiting pride in what they do, where we see a sense of achievement in everything that they actually are, they're prioritized to do on a daily basis. There's that sense of connection, ownership that comes from these sales team members. So the intangible benefits are reinforced positive behaviors that create the culture of performance. And this is what we always emphasize on for organizations. It's the culture of performance which outlasts the rewards that you give for immediate actions that are rewarded for. So the intangible outcomes, they show in the sales growth, but the intangible shows the engagement, the loyalty, and the motivation which sustains performance on the long term. We always say, don't look at the short term, always look at the long term.
That's a great point. It reminds me a little bit of that. I don't want to say necessarily the chicken and the egg, but you're looking for the outcomes, but you do need those intrinsic factors that are going to motivate you internally to get to that. And I suppose that's the whole topic of the conversation. Tim, I'm going to come back to you a little bit, where we're going to kind of meld the two, between the behavioral science component and the incentive side. And the first thing I want to ask you is, we're going to touch on the extrinsic motivating factors, and understanding from your perspective, do they strengthen motivation, or are there instances where they can actually weaken motivation?
It's a good question, Carl. There is this there is this work that has been done around something called the overjustification effect, right? With this idea of crowding, of the extrinsic crowding out the intrinsic motivation. And the reason that we care about intrinsic motivation is because it is stronger. I mean, it's ultimately it's the whole thing. It really becomes the centerpiece of our motivation in the long term. Overjustification effect, though, has been studied more carefully to try to sort of understand where it fits and where it doesn't. And what the researchers find is that in places where people are paid too little or rewarded too little or rewarded too much, you can actually have a choke effect by actually being paid too much, by actually having a reward that's too great for a particular situation. And so those extremes are where overjustification can really get in the way, where the extrinsic reward can be either too little or too great, and both of those situations can have this minimizing effect on the intrinsic motivation. For the most part, in the center of it, though, it's all kind of fair game. It's the extrinsic can be the fake it till you make it. It can be the tool to stimulate the intrinsic motivation and to build skills to help especially the middle performers get better at doing the things that will lead them to becoming top performers. That extrinsic motivation can really be a wonderful thing.
One of my favorite quotes, I can't not remember from which book, and it may not be verbatim, but it was, confidence is not a prerequisite for success, but it's a byproduct of past success, right? You become more confident based on what you've done successfully in the past, and that will give you the confidence that ultimately will help you be successful in the future. And I think that's exactly what you're describing with that middle audience, and in being able to provide kind of those elements of mastery and moving them towards that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Now, do you have any tips for how organizations can, keep in mind that those two poles, and how they can perhaps have that choking effects that you described? Is there anything in the middle that's a nice balance?
Shola pointed it out just beautifully, right?
Okay.
This idea that if the compensation and the commission structure is focused on outcomes, then then to try to get to where the heart of the culture lies, and how we treat each other, how we go about doing our business, how we process things, how we treat our customers. All these elements are great for intangible rewards, are really great for sort of stimulating, especially in that middle ground. We haven't talked about this, but top performers are really in that rarefied air of being able to sit out there and just do really great work, in large part just because they're wired for it. They've found jobs that absolutely line up perfectly with their DNA and their dispositions, just perfectly. They're sort of the lucky few, basically. But that's not easily replicable. What is replicable is what Shola is talking about, by using rewards that actually help with the processes, that help the people who are really good on three wheels and are trying to get better at two wheels, or are really good on two wheels trying to get good on one wheel. I mean, go from tricycle to bicycle to unicycle, but all those are gradation steps that we need confidence, just as you said, Carl, and we need that sense of stimulating and rewarding the culture and the engagement and why I'm doing it. That's really what matters, and especially in the long term.
That is great, and I love the interplay between the two of you. It's just organic. It's great.
I should be working with Tim.
That's it.
We should be working together, Shola.
Maybe you will. So I'm going to go a little bit off the cuff here, because I think, Shola, I'm interested in, we didn't talk about this, but I think there's something interesting that you can perhaps share. I know in Africa, a lot of the sales reps and the sales audience is mobile first, right? And you're looking at instances where, and we know with mobile that there's a lot of noise, right? And there's a lot of distraction, and there's constant notifications and all of that. So I was hoping that you can teach me a little bit about how you would propose in conversations with your clients, how can you motivate behavior rather than just the end results in a scenario where people are inundated with distractions and things like that? How have you leveraged those innovative solutions that you're known for in a scenario like that to kind of motivate behavior rather than just rewarding outcomes? Do you have any examples?
Yes, of course, Carl. And I like that question because it resonates with the human nature and human behaviors and how we are actually persuaded towards certain things that are supposed to equip us to, work better, in the sense that employers or leaders in organizations will generally think, oh, these are the tools that they need to make them, perform better in the field. But over time, through engagements and through feedbacks, we get to see that sometimes there's a sensory overload from these guys in the field, where there's so much information that they need to deal with, sometimes in terms of, oh, this is where the program is at, this is the new information as regards this level and that layer and this layer. Now, engagements do happen in that space, but there needs to be a motivation that makes even these guys connect to all that information, even when it is disseminated. And this is where you get to understand the difference in when we talk about ownership, when we talk about the mastery and autonomy and finding, purpose in their tasks on a daily basis. The 3 intrinsic motivators, elements of motivation, I believe, where despite all the information that they actually are layered with, sometimes in the field, the desire to always achieve, to always hit the next performance threshold and be recognized, because in Africa the channel sales space is relational, and it is also celebratory, in the sense that everybody feels responsible for a particular task or to be able to meet a particular target at every point in time. So irrespective of every demand in terms of what they need to do with their mobile devices or the program or what the program is layered with, you still find them engaging, in the sense that they know all this is tied together. It is all woven together for them to be able to shine, to be the rising star, to be the superstar at the end of the day. So it is mobile first, in the sense that the infrastructure, I know we haven't gotten to this, the infrastructure is simplified, but every layer and every program rule that is tied to it, you still find the top performers engaging with it, because they know it is still part of what will take them, what will actually sustain them at the top. So it's not necessarily a burden to the top performers. And then for the middle guys, they get to also start learning the behaviors of the top performers. And so that is how you have the ripple effect through the system, where you start seeing a change across the whole ecosystem, Yep,
you kickstart the flywheel, and it gets everybody kind of going.
I'm so sorry, Carl. So
okay.
The question was, what is the motivation there? The motivation there for them is still the sense of achievement, the pride, the ownership of that particular, task, of the roles that they're actually, the roles that they're actually occupying in that space. That is where the motivation comes from, which is intrinsic, intrinsic, sorry.
That's right, absolutely.
Carl, can I just add on to that? Shola, you said that just so beautifully, and I was just thinking of if we're an athlete and we're trying to improve our speed. So we already know how to ride the bicycle. We're trying to improve our speed or our distance. We have to take on new skills. We have to do something differently than we've been doing in the past. Otherwise, insanity. We get the same result, right? We do the same thing, we get the same result. So if we're going to do something differently, what are we going to do differently? What's going to motivate us to look for the new things? Ultimately, the achievement is part of it, of where we want to go. But I want that achievement for the sake of the achievement itself, not for the reward that's at the end or for the commission that's at the end. And so I'm willing to adapt those new skills, and those new skills can come from all kinds of rewarded behavior for training or process or, again, cultural, for we get our boss recognizing us in different ways. Those are all ways that stimulate that intrinsic motivation that appeal to me already naturally, just to go faster, to ride better, but now get applied in a much more sort of meaningful way, because I feel like I'm making progress, and progress is such an important part of any motivational discussion.
Absolutely.
Thank you for jumping in there, Tim. That's a great point, and it brings me to a question. You touched on it, that top performers, they are inherently lucky in that they've found something that allows them to shine, right? It allows them to succeed and to go and exceed expectations regularly. There are still, we'll call it 80% of the audience that is not that 20% of top performers. So when you're approaching, as a sales leader, you do understand that your top 20%, they're going to be motivated naturally. They're going to do what they can to succeed. Do you have any recommendations, Tim, for how an organization or a sales leader can look at the rest of their team and say, no, this is great. I'd love to start layering in some elements of this intrinsic motivating factor, but this intrinsic motivation, but I'm not quite sure which is going to resonate with which audience member. Do you have any recommendations for perhaps slowly taking the training wheels off and how to go about implementing those steps?
Yeah, Carl, the one thing that is universal, if we follow through on this idea of progress, that we all love, that we as humans are all naturally magnetized to be drawn to, is progress for ourselves. A lot of companies get caught up in leaderboards that really only impact a very small percentage of the people at the top, because everybody else is kind of resigned to the fact that, I could try as hard as I could, but I'm not going to get to number one. Yeah. Can I get better than the guy who's right ahead of me? Maybe I could do that, but that's not enough to get to the top, and it ends up being deflationary in terms of your motivational drive. So competing against yourself is really the target. When everyone gets to compete against their own history, their own processes, their own recognition, for instance, their own engagement, their own results along the way, those are the things that you have the most control over and have the most likelihood of impacting as well. And to be rewarded for just doing better actually makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And I've done this for many years, have great evidence that it's a powerful there's a powerful ROI associated with it as well.
I don't know where this came to be, but the concept of incremental growth is sometimes seen as a negative by some audiences. But in reality, to your point, if everybody is showing incremental growth, that in the end is going to give you those end results that you're looking for, and at the same time is going to push people with that progress that you're talking about, that universal motivator. And it's 100% right. I run. And the only way that you can tell if you're actually making progress is either how much further you can run or how much faster you can run. And you'll never compete with the one, because you're not competing on the same plane. There's age, there's body type, there's all different aspects you can't control. So you can only compete against yourself in those scenarios. So that's fantastic. I'm going to make a very strong note of that for future conversations with a few clients I can think of already.
Excellent.
Shola, I'm gonna go to you quickly here, and I want your opinion on. We're gonna go back to these, your topic of, or the fact that you're a great educator as it relates to the conversations that you have with your clients. I would love your opinion on, for an organization that is just starting to think about their own incentive and recognition program. Collectively, they're sitting in their office and they're wondering, how do I even start? So what is something that they should first think about when entertaining the idea of implementing this within their teams?
That's a fantastic question, and which should be the foundation that should be laid before the building blocks are actually put on, that foundation. And the first thing I always say that should be considered is to answer the question, what behavior are you trying to influence? half the time, people go into trying to get reward programs put in place for their employees or sales team just from the standpoint of rewarding performance. But it goes beyond that, because we as professionals are actually in this space to steer behaviors, positive behaviors that are reinforced. And these reinforced behaviors are the ones that sustain performance. So the first question always is, what behavior are they trying to reinforce? And incentive programs work best when they are designed to reinforce specific actions aligned with the corporate objectives. What are the objectives specifically that you're trying to address? And then, of course, it differs. Like we all know, it could be aligned with maybe product knowledge, customer engagement, brand loyalty. It's a plethora of, objectives. Options, yes. And a company may be interested in, a product line or deepening their customer engagements. But the key thing about it is steering the right behavior. That is the key thing. And one thing is, an incentive program becomes more effective when you're able to outline what this behavior is that you're actually looking into, transforming. Yeah. So I always say something before deciding on what the rewards are, because that is the biggest point of excitement in creating an incentive program. It's always about the rewards, what the big rewards are, what the immediate rewards are, what the long-term rewards are. But the key question to ask is, what behaviors will drive the outcome that you want to see? That's one question I always say.
And that's great feedback.
Just to add to that, it is a fantastic first question to ask. What are the behaviors that we're looking for? The second question should be, what are the behaviors that they're doing now, and why are they doing them? Because humans aren't irrational. We're pretty rational beings. We do things for a reason. Why are we doing the things that we're doing now? And that can help us plot the course from where we are now to where we want to be. Because if we're talking about behavior change isn't some kind of magical thing you just snap your fingers and just people do. It's humans. And so plotting a course from where we are now to where we want to be is actually something I think that is underutilized when it comes to incentive design.
This is a great place to end. This has been a wonderful conversation. I want to thank you both, Tim and Shola. I've learned a lot. I've taken a lot out of it. I know that our listeners will as well. I want to say for all listeners, don't forget, if this topic is of interest to you, we have a wonderful community within the IESP and great experts like Tim Houlihan that can help you along in your journey to design your programs and getting the most out of your participants, sales, or even their support teams. So on behalf of everyone within the IESP, thank you very much for listening to Motivation Insiders. Be on the lookout for our next episode. I'm Carl McDonald. Until next time.